Good morning and happy Halloween. My name is, I'm going to call to order this regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee for Thursday, October 31st. My name is Jeremy Schrader and I'm the chair of this committee. With me at the dais are Council President Bender, Councilmember Reich, and Councilmember Goodman. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. First, we're going to be a little unusual. We're going to do an announcement that we have a city council member from Kandun, Philippines joining us. Join if you wouldn't mind standing up. We would just thank you so much for coming to our committee and visiting us. We have 11 items on today's agenda, including a public hearing, a quasi-judicial hearing, and 3 discussion items. And the first thing we'll do is we'll dispense with the consent agenda. Item number 3 is the environmental assessment worksheet for the North Loop Green Project. Item number 4 is the park dedication requirements waiver associated with the River Loop Development Project. Item number 5 is a rezoning application submitted by Meredith Barnhart for 2800 University Avenue Southeast. Item number 6 is the 2 rezoning applications submitted by 4737 Minnehaha Avenue LLC for the properties at 4721 and 4737 Minnehaha Avenue. Items numbers 7 and 8 are commemorative street name additions for 3rd Avenue South and 4th Avenue South between 36th Street East and 42nd Street East. This action will add the names of Clarissa Rogers Walker Way and Lana Q. Newman Way to these stretches of road. Are there any discussion on any of these items, or any committee members like to pull anything off? Not seeing anything, I move the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. We'll now move on to our public hearing, item number 1, which is the application submitted by North Star Community Rowing for an interim use permit at 5134 Avenue North and 3360 North 1st Street. And I'll ask for the staff presentation first.
Good morning, Chair Schrader, council members. This is an application by North Star Community Rowing. Penelope Pate Green is here with the organization. She has applied for an interim use permit to allow a park with a walkway to and a dock in the Mississippi River. The property is located at 5134th Avenue North and then 3360 North 1st Street. This is the southern portion of the Upper Harbor Terminal site. This is located just north of 33rd Avenue between the railroad tracks and the Mississippi River. As I said, this is part of the Upper Harbor Terminal site that is owned by the city of Minneapolis. And the city, as you know, is working on a redevelopment strategy for the entire property. The property has been and is currently being used for open storage of bulk materials. The interim use permit is to allow a community rowing facility on a portion of the site. North Star Community Rowing, their program provides rowing opportunities for adults and adolescents with physical disabilities, youth from under-resourced communities, and members of the community who want to benefit from the health and recreational benefits of rowing. They are seeking an interim use permit for a full 5 years until from November 8th, or until November 8th of 2024, excuse me. They are making physical changes to the site. Specifically, the ones that are being captured under the interim use permit today are to reduce the grade from the street level to the shoreline by establishing a 4-foot wide walkway and then installing an accessible dock in the Mississippi River. The use, it has been determined that this use is substantially similar to a park, which is allowed in the I-2 zoning district, and I should say that the site is zoned I-2 and is also located in the shoreland overlay and the floodplain overlay districts. Parks are a permitted use in those zoning classifications. However, those aspects, that walkway and then the dock, require conditional use permits, and so that is what you are actually voting on today under the interim use permit. That is what's triggering the interim use, because those need CUPs. CUPAD does find that the interim park with a walkway to and a dock in the river will not be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, comfort, or general welfare, and that they will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the vicinity. We are recommending that you approve this, subject to the condition that it expire on or no later than November 8th of 2024. And I will stand for any questions.
Thank you. Let the record reflect we've been joined by Councilmember Gordon. Not seeing any questions. Thank you very much. And seeing no other questions from my colleagues, I'll now open the public hearing, and I want to see if anyone is here to speak on item number 1. And if you could say your name and address for the record.
Council members, my name is Penelope Pate Green. I'm the board chair for North Star Community Rowing and a co-founder. North Star Community Rowing has been providing equitable access for people in the Twin Cities and specifically North Minneapolis since 2016. We look forward to the opportunity to provide equitable access to our river. The river is a beautiful, fabulous resource, and it is something that too many people have no way of accessing for any type of recreation. So we're looking forward to doing that with this equitable access opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anyone else interested in speaking? Anyone else interested in speaking? Not seeing anyone, I'm going to close the hearing. Councilmember Reich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How exciting to have this type of activation for the upper stretch of the river. I thank you for your effort, and we look forward to it being activated as you described. And I will move the item.
Thank you. Not seeing anyone else. Council President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just can't help but also echo what Councilmember Reich just said, and it's really exciting to see this vision for the river coming to life in all of these ways, and especially in a way that helps connect our youth to nature in the city, and especially helps, bring all of our community together around this amazing asset. So thank you for your work, and this has been decades in the making of really enlivening and restoring the riverfront. So thanks to Councilmember Reich and the Park Board and everyone who's laid the groundwork for all of this.
Councilmember Reich's motion is before us. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. We'll now move on to number 2, which is the consideration of appeal submitted by Eric Takashita regarding the Planning Commission's approval of a variance at 4736 and 4740 Grand Avenue South. We'll begin with the staff presentation.
Good morning, Chair Schrader and council members. The appeal before you is an appeal of the Planning Commission's decision to approve a parking variance at 4736 and 4740 Grand. This was accompanied with a site plan review application for 23 dwelling units. The applicant had proposed to provide 10 parking spaces here. An appeal was filed on October 16th by Eric Takashita for the Planning Commission's decision to approve the parking variance. And I'll quickly run through some of the plans that were submitted by the applicant. This is a 4-story building. The zoning here is R5. The building envelope, the density of the building, the height of the building are all consistent with the R5 district. The only application was for the parking variance and site plan review. This is a rendering of the building and the elevations. So the applicant had proposed to provide 10 parking spaces located in an enclosed parking on the ground floor, accessed by a shared driveway that's shared with the property to the south. This is kind of a unique part of the city. So the building itself does not qualify for the transit incentive parking reduction. That reduction was adopted in 2015 as a way to potentially reduce housing costs by allowing infill development on smaller sites. And this, if the site were to qualify for the transit incentive reduction, there would be no parking required since there are fewer than 50 units in the building. So while the site is not located within, so the definition within the zoning code is that the site has to be located within a quarter mile of one bus transit stop with midway headways of 15 minutes or less. And so the site is not located within a quarter mile of one bus transit stop. However, it is located within a quarter mile of many transit stops that have somewhat frequent transit, although they don't no one stop qualifies for that transit incentive reduction. So the site is located between 2 high-frequency routes, the Route 4 and the Route 18. It's also just over half a mile away from the 35W stop at 46th Street, which it's served by many express routes and will be served by the future Orange Line BRT route. I prepared this map that shows the transit routes and their to to the north of this area of the city, we do consider the Route 4 to be a high-frequency route. However, when it gets farther south in the city, it does split, and parts of the Route 4 go down Lyndale, and parts of the Route 4 go down Bryant. And so while this site is located within a quarter mile of the Route 4 on Lyndale, that stop itself is not served by all of the routes. So it doesn't have the midday headways. So the site is within a quarter mile of the Route 46, the Route 18G, several express routes, including the 113 that goes to the U and the 135 that goes downtown. And it's just about a third of a mile away from the Route 18 that runs down Nicollet. So in staff's assessment, while this site does not explicitly qualify for the transit incentive reduction, it does have excellent access to transit, and because of the unique orientation of bus routes in this part of the city, staff finds that the request is reasonable to reduce the parking from 23 spaces to 10. So staff is recommending that the Zoning and Planning Committee uphold the Planning Commission's decision to approve the variance to reduce the minimum parking from 23 spaces to 10 spaces. And I will stand for any questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon?
So even though it has incentives, it still requires a variance?
So this site does not qualify for the transit incentives.
Okay.
Because of the way that
But it was close. I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you very much. At this point, I'll open up the hearing, and I'll first give the appellant, the opportunity to speak to the committee. Ms. Takashita, would you like, or you or a representative like to speak? And if you could say your name and address for the record.
Right. Good morning, Chair Schroeder and committee members. I'm Paula Collies, and I'm representing Eric Takashita, who's the appellant here, and on behalf of many of the neighbors that are here and others who are not present here today. I know that you have already received a lot of material from us and documentation with regard to this matter, so I'm not going to go through everything point by point. But I do want to address, from my perspective, the central issue here are the variance standards, and in particular, the requirement that of practical difficulty with regard to granting a variance. As you know, under the city ordinance and also under state law, there's really three primary criteria for granting a variance. That means that this property, the particular site at issue, it has trouble complying with ordinance standards because of unique circumstances to that particular site, and that are not based solely on economic conditions. Now, also, it is the applicant's burden to prove that that a variance is warranted in this case. It's not up to other people to disprove it. It's up to the applicant to prove why the variance is necessary. The other standard is that the applicant has to show that he intends to use the property in a reasonable manner, and that it's in keeping with the spirit and intent of the ordinance, and that the proposed variance will not be detrimental to the neighborhood, to others, will not be injurious to the health, safety, and welfare of the general public or to particular neighboring properties. Now, the decision of the Planning Commission to approve the requested variance in this case is a broad departure from the standard for granting a variance. And in particular, I'm going to focus on this issue of the practical difficulty and unique circumstances. Here, the applicant has stated to the Planning Commission and in its materials that it is able to build on this site without a variance. It could do that. In fact, apparently at one point they did have plans to develop and include all the parking on it. What they are asking for is a 57% reduction in parking to an area that's already very congested. So they don't meet the first consideration because they are able to use this property without a variance. And it's simply an economic consideration on their part, which they stated in the record. They could build it, but parking is expensive and it would cost more. That's an economic consideration. That isn't a reason for granting the variance. But second, and primarily here, there isn't any circumstance that's unique to the property. And as planning staff has indicated, they do not qualify for the parking incentive. It may be that there is access to other routes, but it doesn't meet the criteria for a parking incentive in this case. And also, the location of transit lines is something that's general to the entire community. It's not specific to this parcel. And there is not any Minnesota case law, any court decision that has interpreted a variance in this way by applying something that is applicable to a general neighborhood condition and finding that that's a unique circumstance to this property. It's the complete opposite of being unique to this property. Everybody in this area is affected in the same way by the fact of the location of the bus lines. It may be that the city wants to encourage public transit, but that's a completely different issue from whether or not this property is eligible for a variance. And I think all of this discussion about the bus lines is actually irrelevant to the issue at hand because the applicant has not shown that there is a circumstance unique to this property that justifies a variance. Ordinarily, the law requires, defines that term in relation to particular physical conditions of the site, somehow related to what can be done on this site. And that's just not the circumstances here by their own admission and by what the staff is telling you also. There's nothing inherent about this site. It has to do with a general neighborhood condition that is what's driving this request for a variance. So I think what the Planning Commission did by approving this variance and what you would do is, if you approve this variance, is really turn the standard upside down. There is no practical difficulty, and you would just be saying, well, we like this idea, let's grant the variance here. City of Minneapolis does have impressive goals for improving diversity in housing and encouraging public transit. But good ideas don't trump the law. And in this case, the requirements for obtaining a variance are just not satisfied. So I will stand for questions and may come up again to respond to those, but there are many other people who want to address the particular evidence that addresses the particular circumstances here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eric, if you say your name and address for the
I
record.
know. Chair Schroeder, thanks so much for the opportunity, and council members, council president. My name is Eric Takashita, and I live at 4737 Harriet Avenue. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the committee this morning. As some of you know, I've spent most of my career actually supporting community development in the city of Minneapolis, right? I have been a huge champion of affordable housing, of density, of transit-oriented development. I worked for Mayor Ryback when he was in office. I also was the deputy director of the Local Initiative Support Corporation, LISC. I want to be clear, I'm here not for myself, but actually for the 400 and plus people, 404 people that signed a petition, as you see here, opposing this variance, and the 30 plus families that have actually taken money out of their pockets to file the appeal and to hire the attorney. Many of folks couldn't be here, but some are, and if I would like to ask them actually just to stand, if I could, the folks that are here opposing this, because I'm not here by myself. Thank you. Our sincere hope is that the council will prevent the need for future litigation by doing the right thing, the legal thing, and denying the variance. We know that you've read our appeal and a letter from our attorney and other letters outlining all the reasons why this is the wrong project for this location, so I'll try to limit my comments, and I'll be happy to answer any questions or provide additional information after my remarks. As Paula noted, the fact of the matter is that the required findings haven't been made to grant a variance. Dean at the Planning Commission said that they can make the project work without a variance. That's great. As I said, I'm all for development, and I would welcome new neighbors. I would welcome the opportunity to work with Josh and his team on building a great project in our neighborhood. That's great. But as the Planning Commission said, at the Planning Commission, they also said that they need the variance because they want to make the units more affordable and wanted to create a more luxury product. Unfortunately, when you look at it, that's exactly what they're doing here. They're proposing to charge $1,200 to $1,400 for a studio apartment, which is comparable to apartments in Uptown at like Lake and Aldrich or at 29th and Lyndale. And those places actually have better amenities, including better access to frequent transit. With all due respect to staff, Lindsay,
One quick thing, please direct your comments just straight here.
Oh,
to our
sure.
staff.
Happy to.
Thank you.
But with all due respect to staff, the proximity to transit, as Paula said, or the lack thereof, is simply not a practical difficulty. And just because you don't qualify for an incentive, it doesn't mean it's a practical difficulty. It just means you don't get the incentive, right? I mean, that's kind of clear. And as has been mentioned, as staff said, the site doesn't qualify, right? There's 3 buses that travel at midday, only 3. One travels like every hour. The other 2 travel every half an hour, and they go in different directions, right? Anybody that takes a bus knows that having 2 buses that go in different directions isn't the same as having 1 bus that goes in one direction every 15 minutes. It's just not high-frequency transit. I will also add, as Paula mentioned, that this unique orientation to transit is not unique to the property, right? It may be a unique orientation to transit, but it's not unique to the property, and that's the standard for issuing a variance, right? It has to be unique to the property. The other side of this required findings piece is that the project can't change the essential character of the location or hurt the neighbors. And unfortunately, the plan currently under proposal would do both of those things. Despite having an R5 zoning, this is not a high-density area. There are mostly single-family homes and duplexes on this block. There are 3 triplexes, there are 4 fourplexes, and there's 1 6-unit apartment. There is no other 23-unit building that's 4 stories on 2 lots within a mile, and this simply would not be compatible with either the existing character of the neighborhood or the future that's envisioned under the 2040 plan. This project will clearly have a negative impact on the neighbors, and others will speak to this later. The neighbors to the south are being asked, or more or less told, that they're going to share their driveway with a 23-unit apartment instead of a single-family home. That's a huge difference and a huge impact. The neighbors to the north are going to be facing a 47-foot building that goes 100 feet long, well, 97 feet long. That's going to be only 11 feet from the property line, right? The neighbor there, Chris, told me that it's going to make his unit basically feel like a dungeon. So clearly this will have a negative impact on the immediate neighbors. The project will also be detrimental to the general public. Even if everyone who lives here doesn't own a car, which kind of seems unlikely, there'd still be hundreds of new commercial vehicles with Amazon drop-offs or Bite Squad or DoorDash or Lyft or other kind of car services that will cause a problem for emergency vehicles, for bicycles, and for pedestrians in the neighborhood. The evidence here is clear and overwhelming. This project does not meet the required findings. There's no practical difficulty. It will change the essential character, and it will be detrimental to the well-being of others. It's simply the wrong project for this location. As someone who truly believes in government, one of the things that's been most painful for me is to have my neighbors, some of whom are here, say, what's the point? The city has already made up its mind and it's going to do whatever the heck it wants to do. They're not going to follow the law. And to be honest with you, I get it. It kind of seems that way. Staff has deemed the application complete even though it was rife with errors, such as the applicant saying the building would have 20 spaces when it only has 10, or that the variance was needed to reduce the number of spots from 15 to instead of 23. Staff didn't seem to care that the applicant didn't post proper notification for the public hearing, and it was staff, not the developer, that suggested the transit incentive was a justification for a variance. Comments of the Planning Commission also made it clear that at least some of the commissioners didn't make their decision based on the evidence in the specific case. So I may just be naive, but I do believe in government. I do believe in this process. And I believe that you all will not act in an arbitrary and capricious way, that you will not provide preferential treatment to this applicant or to this project, and that you'll follow the law. In closing, I just urge you, in the words of Spike Lee, to do the right thing. The city can't approve a variance just to advance a public policy objective, no matter how noble, such as increasing density, reducing parking, or increasing affordable housing. While we may or may not like a developer or project, we have to treat them all the same. And while we may or may not like the laws regarding public hearings, transit incentives, or needing to make the required findings to grant a variance, we have to follow the law. Elected leaders, appointed officials, and government employees are stewards of the public's sacred trust. And I don't care whether you're the president or you're the planning commission, you have to follow the law. Do the right thing and deny the variance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I'll give the project applicant the opportunity to address the committee. Would a representative like to speak about the project? You can say your name and address for the record, please.
Good morning, and thank you. It'll be a two-part presentation. It'll be myself and then Josh immediately afterwards. So I'll keep my comments brief. My name is Dean DeVolis, 333 Washburn Avenue North, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Eric and others are right. We did have a choice on how to shape this project in terms of units and number of parking spaces. We made this a conscious choice of providing what you see today on really two bases, because the basis is, number one, this type of project will actually generate less parking, and I'll explain that in a little bit, and it allows for affordability. The reason why we came to this conclusion partially is based on my experience, and I don't mean this to be bragging, but we've been involved in more housing projects in Minneapolis than the architect, and in the surrounding suburbs, and like Liberty Mutual Insurance, we've seen a lot, and we've seen a lot what happens with parking, with projects, and how it works. The larger, more expensive units actually generate more parking than even the 1-for-1 ratio, and I have this from project experience. And I'll use one project for example. I'll use a couple, Parkway 25, in which that has a 1.75 parking ratio. The reason why it happens right on the border to Minneapolis, St. Paul, large units, luxury units, and every unit generates 2 cars or better. The 1 bedrooms because they're husband and wife, the 2 bedrooms because they're couples, the 3 bedrooms. And when I have a garage that's large, it has a waiting list, and cars spill in the neighborhood because people self-select to a type of unit they want. Same with Boutique 25, which is another project we have on the Greenway in Minneapolis, same basis. Projects we've done for Yellow Tree development, which is familiar, which have ratios between 0.4 and 0.7, their garages are actually running full or partially full on this. So we made a choice to do less parking and appeal more of those type of residents for the affordability, because as you know, parking costs $25,000 to $30,000 a stall. It's just around some places 40. So more parking you have, the more expensive housing. We were shooting for housing in this building that basically averaged between 65 to 75% AMI, adjusted median income. That was our goal, and to do it was a mix we came up with to make this work on this process. So we're not asking for an incentive. We're just asking for variance to allow us to create housing that part of the state and neighborhood's goals is to create affordability, which we are doing, and to actually lessen the parking impact, because the type of tenants that we're attracting is tenants that are selecting not to have a car, some due to affordability, some due to lifestyle, some's commitment to having less back on earth. And so the basic project is one that actually does afford the benefit of less parking demand and does afford the benefit of affordable housing. And Josh, if you want to come up now and finish up, I appreciate it. So thank you.
1 second, we have a comment or question.
Oh, sorry.
Councilmember Goodman.
Mr. DeVos, that's all good, but how does that meet the criteria set up under the request for a variance, which essentially means something very specific about this property is unique? That's what we're judging this by, not whether or not you're doing a good thing, but whether or not you meet the letter of the law. And as I understand it, I'm unclear about what your practical difficulty is, other than cost.
The difficulty is that we just believe this is that we're asking for variance that provides the housing that's appropriate for the neighborhood.
That's
period.
not a practical difficulty, though.
You want to, Josh can talk about that. So I'm going to turn that question to Josh.
That would be great. Mr. Chair, if they could just address the specific thing that's in front of us. What is the practical difficulty and what unique to the property, not the neighborhood or the area?
Sure.
And how does this meet the standard? Because by any stretch of the imagination in my mind, it does not. But you could convince me So please attempt to do that rather than telling us the good thing you're doing, because lots of people are doing good things all over the city.
Okay, thank you. My name is Joshua Siegel. I'll answer the question. I'm at 5414 Washburn Avenue South. First, we feel the hardship is in the grade change from the front of the site to the back of the site. It's 9.5 feet. The first proposal that we put together was a matter of right. 23 units with 21 parking, and we offered to provide a shared vehicle to get a 10% bonus. We brought that plan to the city. It was viewed as 5 stories from the front. We took that plan away because they said that would not be approved, any CUP on the site. There was actually 3 stories from the back or the rear of the site. We went back to the drawing board. We tried to provide an underground ramp. We tried to provide automated parking. It just didn't work. The site was too small. The turning radii was too small. The ramp was too steep. We did our very best to provide parking sufficient for the number of units, and we went back to the drawing board and understood what type of tenant would be in that location, and that's where we found to appeal more to studios. The hardship is really just the 9.5 feet from the front to the back, and we did our very best to alleviate that.
Mr. Chair, I don't want to take away from their time. What is the new comp plan zoning for this site?
It'd be interior, so I mean, maybe we can get a quick update from staff on describing what the interior, what it would be after 2040. And just to be clear, that right now, that is not we have not adopted 2040, and that is not the legal standard.
No, I fully understand that, because usually I'm the other way around. I'm more worried about what the new standard's going to be. That's why I'm wondering what it is.
Yep, it's interior. It's slated for interior 2 in the future, in the built form map in the 2040 plan. So this is kind of a unique block that the entire block is R5 and has been that way for a long time, but it will be interior 2 under the new plan, although that isn't in effect yet. And obviously, even once the 2040 plan is effective on January 1st, the R5 zoning will still be in place for the foreseeable future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Joshua, you've got your time now if you like.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. One thing to add to my understanding of that plan is that it will require 0 parking, so it could complicate the same issues that the appellant is speaking of.
Make that argument if I were you.
Okay, well, I thought it was 10.
Well, if you combine an interior 2, it could only be 6.
I might give the applicant the time to go through the presentation. Sorry to keep jumping in on that. Yeah.
I apologize. So my intention was to come up here and to explain that we've tried to make some compromise with the neighbors. We've sat down a few times, 2 times with the south neighbors, to try to get on the same page to do what we can do to alleviate any concerns through building and through operations of the building. I'd like to just go through a few quick steps that we've taken. We had promised to construct our building a specific way in which we will not interfere with the shared driveway. The driveway will stay in use throughout the project. We will pay for 2 years of snow removal and any repair if needed, and 80% of all future costs, if not more. We will be gifting the south neighbor shrubs and small landscaping of choice to aid in minimizing any additional light impact from more drivers using the shared driveway. We will work together with the south neighbor, ensuring all lighting is appropriately directed onto the 4738 property and surrounding sidewalks. The lighting is reflected downward and not towards the 4744 building. Additional measures will be taken to ensure simplicity of the shared driveway, such as trash pickup will only occur between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., and we believe 1 time a week is feasible. We are open to neighborhood input on our final color choices. We believe the neighborhood progress is about compromise and coordination. Keeping the driveway open during construction will add substantial cost to our logistics and carpentry labor. The working agreement is just one aspect of our willingness to compromise. We are happy to provide this working agreement with our neighbors. It should be noted this is quite the opposite of economic reasons in which the appellant incorrectly stated. We intend to be as green and environmentally friendly as possible. As a reminder, we are partnering with Bruce Brunner, and he will be moving the duplex and most likely the single family to the same lot just 1 mile away. This will alleviate 150,000 pounds of waste into the landfills and provide 3 additional units, if not more, affordable housing. We believe that the design and function of this building has been a collaborative approach, and the outcome is what we believe is best for the neighborhood. Thank you, and we hope you uphold the decision.
Thank you. I have some questions if you can stay back. I'm just seeing if other of my colleagues do. I guess maybe a couple comments. Like I think
Sure.
you talk about working with the neighbors, and just I know this is one of your first projects. When we see other developers, you have reached out to neighbors, but other developers have done a lot more. Like developing in the city, it has its difficulties, so it is something of having more of a dialogue with neighbors, being able to not just hear, like when you say that you're concerned about being as environmentally conscious as possible, that's fantastic. That really helps the development. But here, all I'm hearing is you're taking the current buildings and moving them somewhere else. Fantastic. I'd say that's one very high standard. But what I'm not hearing is what you're doing with the current building. You know, what's going to happen with the stormwater on the project, what's going to happen with landscaping. There's just a lot other things you can do with building materials, solar ready. There's just a long list of things to do that this committee takes seriously. I think that would be just something we would also look for. So I kind of want to give you an opportunity if there are some of those things being built in. It'd be helpful to hear about those.
Okay. One goal was to have as much greenery as possible in the lobby as well. I'd hate to bring up another restaurant, but there's a green wall in a couple of restaurants, and we had visioned a green wall in our lobby. We have canopy trees, we have shrubs, we have grasses, we have stones, we have pavers. The 11 feet behind the site will be sod. One thing that we would advocate was like a doggy station where we would provide bags. We would actually take a DNA sample of the dog to make sure that any of the fecal would be picked up. And if not, the tenant would be fined. At the second time, they would be expelled. We have the utmost care to protect the site, the neighborhood, and we think the amenities are around Fuller Park and the walkability of that area. And to be really lean on the building side, we do want to be cautious and thoughtful, and I think we are with that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. I'm curious if this concept of the grade change was anywhere in the staff report or in your application or anything, because I thought I reviewed it very carefully, and this is the first time I heard about this. And at 9 foot, which means I haven't had any time to look at, okay, what are neighboring properties? What's the grade change there? How normal is this? How unique is it? How ununique it is? It doesn't feel very unique, and it feels a little bit like this just came in today. Is it in
I
the
don't think
report?
so. We've worked with staff for probably 14 months on this to try to get a concept that would work well and that would be supported with the city, and we felt that would be supported by the neighborhood. We didn't expect the backlash, and we did our very best to also provide a concept plan that would alleviate parking concerns. We felt that we addressed that with the actual concept and the function, the design of the building. It's also 9 feet shorter than what it could be, and it just was the design that would alleviate that grade change. And I'm sorry that it wasn't a focus, but that was we thought we already addressed that.
So all that I found in here in your application was that the variance is needed in order to allow the development of 23 apartment units on the property. Without the adjustments, no practical or feasible configuration of the building can be achieved, nor can the parking for bicycles. So I don't think it feels like you didn't see this as a practical difficulty until later on in the process. So that's just a comment I wanted to make.
Okay. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to note the time and the 2 items we have in front of us, and we haven't had a chance to hear from the public yet. So I think these are great questions. I think some of them are going a little bit farther afield than the question of the parking variance. So I don't want to take away from the time from the applicant to share anything they want us to hear, but wanted to just check in, make sure we hear from the public.
Okay. Thank you.
Nope, thank you very much. I know. Yeah. Still open the hearing to other members of the public who would like to address the committee, and please limit your comments to 2 minutes per person, and they'll be tracked on the clock by the clerk. Would any members of the public like to speak? If you can come up and say your name. We sometimes have people queue up behind the mic. Just in the interest of time, I want to make sure everybody has a chance to speak. Welcome. Can you say your name and address for the record?
Yes, thank you. My name is Nancy Grabo. I live at 4744 Grand Avenue, Unit 3, in the triplex condominium, which shares the driveway with the proposed Fullerton Flats project. I'm very concerned regarding the adverse impact a building of this scale will have on my daily overall enjoyment of my neighboring home. The story building will greatly reduce the natural light to my living spaces and significantly reduce my privacy and sense of security and safety, which were key elements in choosing my home. This development will essentially turn our driveway into an alleyway, increasing the noise and streaming of car headlights shining into my living room, as well as increasing the potential for being inconvenienced by blockages and bottlenecks in accessing our garages. Pulling out of our driveway is already dicey as it is, and turning left is sometimes almost nearly impossible due to being blinded by the cars parking right up to the edge of our driveway. And so I'm really concerned about adding more tenants to this corridor, and I'm also concerned with the estimated number of cars being added. Is a gross underestimate too, considering with the 2 tenants that have lived in the single family home, there's been more cars per persons with valid driver's license living there, and there's been 3, if not 4 cars there. And our easement of the shared driveway was intended for the existing single-family home at 4740 Grand Avenue or comparable property, and Fullerton Flats is far from that. Sharing our driveway with this proposed development is completely unreasonable accommodation to our easement and home. We don't see similar property easements conforming to this standard because it simply isn't done due to the inherent adverse impacts to one's privacy, safety, and depreciation of one's property value. Please don't gamble on my safety in making me and my family and friends the guinea pigs for testing this dual property relationship. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, next speaker.
Hello, my name is Linda Carlson. I live at 4728 Grand Avenue South, 1 door down from this proposed development. My neighbors and I love Minneapolis. We embrace a city where housing is affordable, where the environmental impact of new design is scrutinized, where development adds to the character of the neighborhood, where developers are following the law and voices are heard. This proposed development, which promises 10 spots for 23 units in this particular location at this moment in time in Minneapolis, is not adequate. It will stress our already congested streets. And additionally, by channeling all of the new traffic in and out of this building across the sidewalk, instead of utilizing the alley, the developers would create a dangerous sidewalk crossing 1/4 block from a popular neighborhood park. So granted, the curb cut already exists, but the traffic across it will increase exponentially. And there is no precedent for a transit incentive that is just somewhat close, but does not actually meet their requirements. 17 years ago, we put an offer on our current home, but before we did that, my husband sent me over to Fuller Park to sit for an hour underneath the flight paths. True story. I was so charmed by the park and the families there that I completely forgot to register airplane noise. I say this only because I learned recently that in the 1970s, the cities wanted to build a huge apartment complex on the land that is now Fuller Park. We have an amazing park, and only because committed citizens resisted, committed neighbors organized. And public speaking, as you can tell, is way out of my comfort zone. I'm here because I believe emphatically that we are in the right. As year-round bikers, my husband and I fill our tiny one-car garage with bikes. Winter bikers know that by removing obstacles to the actual ride is paramount. If midwinter I had to haul my bike up from the basement in order to bike to work, I would hit snooze a few more times and opt to drive, overcome by the effort of it all. Because we choose bikes instead of a car in our garage, I have no lower temperature limits for riding my bike. Ask my colleagues. Eric and I are bikers and car owners, and we rely on access to street parking. I'm going to say that again. We rely on street parking because we are bikers.
Thank you.
All right.
Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Denise Takashita, and I live at 4737 Harriet Avenue. I have over 20 years of experience in riding the bus in this neighborhood. This project is being presented as if it has excellent access to frequent transit, but merely saying that doesn't make it true. You really need to look at the facts. This area only has frequent transit to downtown and to the U during rush hour. Personally, I don't like to drive. I would love to be able to rely on transit, but I don't always work 8 to 5, and I go to client sites that are all over the Twin Cities. Sometimes I drive to the Wedge, where I know I can wait just a few minutes to catch a bus that actually does have frequent transit service midday. I've looked into taking the bus to clients in Maple Grove and Eden Prairie, but to be honest, it just wasn't practical. Another example is our neighbor Jane, who's a college student at Augsburg. It takes her 2 buses in almost 90 minutes each way. My point is, while this site is near transit, it's not near a great transit. I ask you to please deny the variance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Amri Ravid. Before I get to my prepared notes, I just want to note that I may have misunderstood, but I was a bit confused by the architect and Josh's replies, considering the fact that the original answer for the parking had to do with affordable housing and being green. But when they replied and they explained their process of thinking, they actually said that they started out by wanting as much parking as possible, but due to other restrictions could not make that happen. So I'm a bit confused by that, but I may have misunderstood. To my prepared notes, I just want to say, as you maybe can tell by my name, oh, by the way, I'm from the adjacent property at 4732 Grand Avenue South. As you can tell from my name, I'm not from around here. I actually come from Haifa, Israel. A few years back, I found love with a woman from Minnesota who brought me back and moved me to Minnesota. She owned this apartment, and she chose it because it was a quaint, quiet residential area that was still within city limits and did not provide that cement feel that she felt was in the city. 3 years ago, she moved me back into this apartment, and the community was amazing. As we moved in, people offered to help us move, and one person went as far enough as to offer to teach me to drive in the snow. They were incredibly welcoming and made me feel at home. This new construction will no longer give that same feeling to the neighborhood. I will now look out the window into possibly a brick wall or worse, somebody else's apartment. There will be a dramatic change to the quaint and quiet neighborhood as we are possibly more than doubling the number of residents on the block. I will no longer enjoy the same sunlight. I'm truthfully concerned with other matters that are all speculation, such as increased potential crime, a lot of people visiting the area. We talked about Amazon boxes, all that stuff. Those are concerns, but they are speculation. Oh, my time's up, I'm sorry. Excuse my sentimental remarks, but let's be realistic. We are talking about people's homes and people's lives, where they spend time with their family, where they come back home every day, they eat their meals and they sleep. It is not a matter to be treated lightly. We cannot assume that because we've seen positive change from reduced parking in some places, this will have the same effect as here.
Thank you.
Yeah, apologies for the lengthy discussion.
Good morning, council members. I'm Stacy Ward. I live at 4725 Harriet Avenue. I'm basically right behind, the building's going to be right behind my house across the alley. When I went to the original neighborhood meeting, and Josh and his group gave their presentation, he said that originally they had planned to building 5 structures with a whole floor of parking. And from my memory, he said that he went to the planning commission and they said, oh, no, that's not a good idea. Don't build the extra floor. And I asked him about why he needed the less parking. And he said, well, we're going to have 10 bike stalls. And he said, well, the Greenway buildings, they don't need the extra parking. And I tried to explain to him that you can't compare a Greenway apartment building to a building that's being built in our neighborhood, because with the bus routes that are available, they're not comparable to the public transit that is available around the Greenway. My oldest son, we were in a triple rollover car accident, and he was too afraid to drive for quite a while, and he decided that he wanted to use the public transportation. He was going to school at Normandale, and he worked in Edina. He literally spent several hours a day on the bus, taking buses to Bloomington, taking buses to Edina. It is not an efficient bus system. If you are not going to downtown, if you're not going to uptown, if you're not going to the U. Most people who decide to move into our neighborhood are not going to choose bikes as their primary form of transportation. And when you calculate how many cars are going to be in a building like this, you're going to want to take the number of units and multiply it by at least 2. And this, I have to say this, I'm sorry, I'll make it quick. Grand is a very narrow snow emergency route. Every time it snows, no one can park on Grand. Every time it snows. And so that entire street will have no parking every single time it snows. Please take that into consideration.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Stephen Ward, and I live on 4732 Pleasant Avenue, which is 1 block east of Grand. Today's actually my 23rd anniversary in living in the neighborhood. I purchased my home on Halloween 1996.
Congratulations.
Thank you. My dad actually grew up in Minneapolis, so north side actually, as his father did as well. What I want to reiterate what my sister was saying quickly, because she ran out of time, was that Grand Avenue is a snow emergency route. And the last several winters, we have had parking restrictions and parking only one side of the street. But on Grand Avenue, it's no parking on the side at all. So with missing all these, we're not having 23 spots for the 23 tenants, and the fact that you have studio apartments, single bedrooms, double bedrooms, unit triples, that's more cars than can be accommodated. So it will be a nightmare during the winter, and our last winters have been not so good. So this will be a burden upon the neighborhood. The second point is this building does not fit being in the middle of a block, in the middle of this neighborhood. Now, in terms of thinking outside the box, 47th and Nicollet, on the other hand, has an abandoned property, and if the neighboring one was purchased, it would be an ideal location for a structure of multiple floors, because there already is a precedence in other buildings on Nicollet that are that high. And so that would be a very good compromise to putting an affordable housing in this neighborhood, which is just a few blocks away. So thank you for your time, and I hope you repeal this variance.
Yep. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bruce Brunner, 2419 West 22nd Street. I'm speaking in support of this project. Joshua met with me and partnered with me to find a way to add more to the project, and when he found out that I have a lot nearby, he asked if the option, because as we were talking about things, is it possible to move these structures, and our intention is to pick them up and move them and provide affordable housing. Our lot is less than a mile away, and we hope we can do that rather than seeing these buildings be turned into landfill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stasia Johnson Steinhagen. I've lived in Tangletown 23 years and raised a couple young adults there. I think I'm the resident that Josh wants in that building. So I'll say I work from home. I work in St. Louis Park. I have a side hustle in Uptown. I own property there, Miss Bender. I bike and drive a Prius to work because I care about the environment and my health, and because a bus can't get me there, not reasonably. My kids drove a car or ride share to their high school sports and events because the bus couldn't get them there at all, and certainly not reasonably if it could. And they went to school downtown. I've lived in Chicago, Seattle, San Francisco, where I use public transport predominantly, and I still had a car, as do my family members who still live there. I have homesteaded and rented a duplex in the Uptown District for almost 30 years. I've seen density done well. I've seen it not done well. And I've seen the transit system come. So perhaps at some time that will happen in our neighborhood. But we have an R5 island. We are talking, just so those of you who haven't been there, this is an R5 block. That's it, among single residential. I'm not sure if we're going to get that. But perhaps one day our terrific R5 island will have been bought up and transitioned into a row of higher density buildings where the residents call for that transit and the possibility of fewer cars. We all welcome that. But you know what? Every one of those buildings will likely be built in the style of the 2040 plan, as bringing the best of the past into that denser future. Single lot, lower story buildings, and moderate density, not a 23-unit, 2-lot, 4-story building. So I want to be clear that I think if we hold up this variance and this building is built, this R5 neighborhood will likely never have another one of these buildings on its block, and it will stand out like a ginormous sore thumb. And I don't want us to be the ones who allowed that to happen, and I really don't want you guys to be the ones to allow that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Miller, and I live at 4744 Grand. This is the triplex that shares the driveway with 4740. I'll be brief. When the Planning Commission approved this, me, my wife, and my son had some serious conversations about, do we want to stick around for this nonsense or not? And we've made the decision, if this gets approved, we're going to move. This building right on top of us is forever going to change the livability of our home and change the character of the neighborhood. It's just not something we want to be a part of. Josh mentioned to you that he's come forward to us to kind of work on some of the issues at hand with the driveway and so forth. Well, he didn't come forward to us. We reached out to him with the understanding that inevitably it sounds like this is going to pass. We hope it doesn't pass. We want you to make the right decision. Josh says he's working with us to figure out snow removal, yet he doesn't do anything with the property we have right now. He's been sharing that driveway since August of 2018 and has done nothing to approach us in sharing the financial responsibility of that driveway. I find it interesting that it's come up that Josh now wants to move these buildings because that's in his heart. Yet the CPED staff report states specifically that these buildings are going to be destroyed. So it seems like that's a new development as well. Through this whole process, I'm just bewildered as to how the city can, pick and choose what laws it wants to follow and which ones it wants to bend, or just ignore altogether. I had more trust in my leaders than what I'm seeing unfold right now. So please, do what's right for the city of Minneapolis and oppose and deny this variance.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good morning. My name is Michael Reed, and my husband and I live at 4749 Grand Avenue. We have owned the building since 1978, and it became our residence in 1995. We purchased our duplex with retirement in mind to make it our permanent home. We brought in the area because it was a secure neighborhood with an urban feel without being overcrowded. It had public transportation and was close to work. When I sought the definition of what zoning was, it was defined as a law that provides for separate commercial and residential districts, with the use of the property within each district to be reasonably uniform. When I learned what a variance is, it states a variance can only be issued if it does not change the essential character of a neighborhood, and it cannot adversely impact neighbors. Our block consists of single-family homes plus duplexes and fourplexes. If you walk down Grand to Lake Street, you will find similar buildings all along the way. If you walk west on Harriet and Garfield, and to the east along Pleasant and Pillsbury, you will find similar structures. A 23-unit, 4-story building will change the character of this neighborhood forever. It will adversely impact me in decreasing my ability to rent our lower unit, plus could decrease my property value. Bill and I lived in New York City for 16 years, and we loved it. It is a great place to live. I am not against density if it is done correctly. This development is being pushed through even as the City Council has approved 2040 under the guise of solving the housing shortage. While the council can still help solve the housing shortage by asking the developer to build a smaller unit and perhaps 57% less parking than the law requires. I guess my biggest fear is I will have an eyesore to live with for the rest of my life. I ask you and the developer to reconsider and to build a building that fits the neighborhood and does not harm other properties and owners, that creates a structure that at least follows 2040. During the last 40 years, we chose to invest in Minneapolis because we trust in its leaders, and it's a sense of fairness. Please do not betray our trust and do your job. Listen to all of us who are taxpayers and homeowners in this neighborhood. It is your vote, but please bear in mind that we will have to live with your decision.
Thank you. If you could wrap up, that's all your time.
Please protect our neighborhood from this development. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Eugenio Meschini. Originally came from Argentina, live in South Minneapolis for 19 years. And I think that understand that sometimes being the first one to come through what the city vision is for the future, I think that I understand and I hear the concerns of the neighbors, but the reality is that we want to open up our neighborhood. We want to be open, we want diversity, we want people that realities today cannot afford to live in our neighborhood, which is precious, and we all love it and we all take very good care of it unless projects like this take place. So I think I welcome the opportunity for new people to come into our neighborhood. And the reality is I don't think it's necessarily fair to blame it on the developer for all the growing pains that the city has, addressing issues such as transportation, snow removal. I think that we will sort those out as they come, but the reality is I think that opening the neighborhood to others is quite a great idea, and the only way some people can live in our great neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker. If I can get an idea how many other people are going to speak? Okay.
Thank you. My name is Dennis Grand. I'm a lawyer. I represent Betsy Brooks, who lives at 4708 Grand. She couldn't be here. I'm not here to talk about the law. That's been adequately addressed. But I just did sort of a little investigation. For the last 2 weeks, for 7 days, I drove down and counted the cars parking on both sides of Grand between 47th and 48th. Every day, every parking space was taken on the street. 58 cars every morning between 6:30 and 7. I know I'm there frequently at night. I know how little parking there is at night. I was interested in learning how little parking there is in the morning. There isn't any on the street. Now, to add another building, apparently you're going to add another building, 23 units, but to reduce the parking, I mean, if you were going to do anything, you should increase the parking required by 23 units, not reduce the parking. So it has a significant impact. This building, reducing the number of parking spaces, has a significant negative impact on the neighbors as far as the ability to park on the street. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Jeremy Reilly. I've lived with my wife and family at 4717 Grand for almost 40 years. I appreciate you hearing us. I'm very concerned about this development, and specifically in regard to the parking and busing issue. I've been a bike rider and transit user for close to 15 years. I don't have a car of my own. I've relied on public transit to get to my job in St. Louis Park for a number of years, and it was not efficient. It would regularly, in the winter months when I couldn't bike, take me at least 50 minutes to get to the St. Louis Park High School, when driving would take 20 minutes. It's an inconvenient node of transit in our neighborhood. It's uphill both directions to the most frequent transit on Nicollet and Lindale or Bryant, and it will affect people who have mobility issues, or, as there are in our neighborhood, people approaching their elderly years. I'm concerned about that. It doesn't fit the incentive. It's inconvenient. You have to rule in regard to those regulations. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good morning. My name is Nina Malm, and I live at 4701 Harriet Avenue South. I've lived there for 45 years. I also have been a principal and a teacher in Minneapolis for 30 years, and I'd like to speak to you this morning from my role as a principal in Minneapolis. For 30 years, I looked out for the safety of children. Safety is number one in my mind for children. What I'd like to talk to you about is the grade change on this particular piece of property. The grade change is actually more like 14 feet. The plans call for a 10-foot retaining wall in the back of this building with an 11-foot space between the back of the building and this 10-foot retaining wall. The fact of the matter is that this property has a 4-foot retaining wall that goes along the shared driveway all the way to the sidewalk. The proposed way to handle the grade change right now is to put another 4-foot retaining wall along the sidewalk, so it would be 80 feet of 4-foot retaining wall, right angled, right at the end of the driveway, with another 4-foot retaining wall. Cars coming out of that driveway cannot see anything. If you're a car coming out and you look to the south, you can see some. There's about 11 feet that you can see. Anyone walking on that sidewalk, you can see because there are see-through balconies on that particular building. But your car is already 4 feet in front of you before you're going to stop, before you can see anything to stop. Children behave erratically. I know, 30 years worth of planning for children. Children behave erratically. So if you look and you want to turn to the north, someone said they just don't turn north, which makes a whole lot of sense. You don't turn north from that piece of property, from that driveway, because you cannot see anything. You cannot see anything. It's totally blind. And what we have right now is a situation that will be a 4-foot retaining wall. You're sitting in a car, you can't see over the 4-foot retaining wall. You can't see in the front. You can't see because there's vans parked here. You just can't see.
Okay, thank you.
We are a neighborhood with children. Many, many children go to Fuller Park. This is a unsafe condition. It's an unsafe design.
Thank you.
My fiduciary role says,
Thank you.
don't do this. Design is wrong.
Thank you. Next speaker. Anyone else interested in speaking? Anyone else interested in speaking? If not, I'm going to now close the hearing and open it up for discussion. All right. I'm just going to do it, but if you, so not seeing any other further discussion, I'm going to move approval of the appeal of the appeal. I'll see if there's any discussion. We are in kind of a time crunch, but I will just kind of defer to my earlier comments. I really feel like there is a lot more that could have been done with this, and it is a very clear-cut issue that does not meet the requirements for the trans variance. I'm going to put my motion. Oh, Councilmember Goodman.
Thank Mr. Chair, I'll first ask staff to direct findings of fact to support the decision should it happen that way. I want to make sure that we note specifically that this variance simply does not meet the criteria that we are supposed to be reviewing, including no practical difficulty and nothing specific with regard to the site to justify this kind of variance. And I appreciate your time and allowing everyone to speak.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any others. That has been moved. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Next up, we will take the discussion items. We will now handle items 9 and 10 together. Item number 9 is an ordinance relating to 3-unit buildings in lower intensity districts and related to development standards. Item number 10 is an ordinance related to lot combinations in lower density districts, and we'll begin with a brief staff presentation.
Good morning, Chair Schrader, committee members. Sorry. Yes, this will be a brief overview. As mentioned, there's 2 ordinances being brought forward right now. The first to allow up to 3 unit buildings in the lower intensity districts, along with any related development standards such as building bulk, lot size required yards, and setbacks. The direction that was given with this was to allow these within the same building scale and size currently allowed for single-family dwellings. The second being the limit on lot combinations in lower intensity districts, with the idea with that is to maintain the small-scale context of these areas. The main policy that supports allowing up to 3 units is the first policy related to access to housing. And the idea with this policy is to allow more housing for significant population growth that's expected and for people who are already living in the city. And this policy supports eliminating disparities, creating more residents and jobs, and affordable housing and access to housing, as well as complete neighborhoods. So currently what's allowed, duplexes are first allowed in the R2 district and triplexes are first allowed in the R3 district. With the amendment, duplexes and triplexes would be allowed in R1 through R2B. Dwellings with 4 or more units would first be allowed in R3. And the map on the right shows the areas that would be, that this amendment would affect. Maintaining the small-scale building size is accomplished in a couple of ways. The first being subjecting the duplexes and triplexes to the same height, FAR lot size, lot coverage, impervious surface, and yard requirements that currently apply to single-family dwellings, and this would apply in the R1 through R2B districts. The second way to accomplish maintaining the small size is limiting lot combinations, specifically through a proposed maximum lot size requirement that would apply, as shown in the table, the R1 through R4 districts as well as the R1 districts. It would just apply to dwellings with 1 to 3 units in these districts. There is the opportunity to apply for a variance, but that variance would be subject to a 30% maximum cap. The illustration on the right is just showing what's kind of intended here, that you couldn't combine a couple of lots, say, and build a bigger structure that would be out of context with these lower intensity districts. At the Planning Commission public hearing, the Planning Commission recommended approval of the amendments, did not make any changes, although they did ask that staff track what happens after the amendments are adopted. So staff is working on some details for an evaluation framework, and we'll be reporting back to them on how we're going to do that, and then report regularly on the data that becomes available. This is in addition to the work that Long Range Planning will be doing on tracking goals, or how they're being accomplished once the comp plan is adopted. There were a couple of things that changed since the Planning Commission meeting in the ordinances. We found an error and fixed that. That's referenced in the RCA. And also we incorporated effective dates for each of the ordinances so it coincides with the adoption of the 2040 plan. So that is my very brief overview. I can take any questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions. I just want to thank you for making this easy to understand, for taking time to brief everyone who requested a briefing, of which I did, and to figure out a way to kind of take some of the irrational concern out of the way. I describe it as the box is the box. And we are not picky about how many families live in the box, but it can't be bigger than the box that's there. And so I think that my description is probably too simplistic, but when I asked if that was true and I got a yes from both the chair and you, it seems like that's a very simple way for people to understand it. So I wanted to thank you for helping figure this out in a very truthful and transparent way.
Thank you.
Council President Midner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll go ahead and move approval of the item. Maybe wanted to briefly comment on a couple of quick things. First is, I think there's another piece of this which is moving 4 units out of the 1 to 4s. And so 4 units will now be treated more like larger multifamily, which I think is really a good change. And we do have some work to do on figuring out how to guide the design and zoning for those, slightly larger but still very small multifamily buildings. But I think it makes sense to treat 1 to 3 units differently than 4 and above. I also just wanted to thank you for making it so easy to work on this. It's a very simple change in its effect, but it was very complicated in the details, as you can see through all of the different changes that were required to achieve this relatively small, in terms of its technical approach change. I did also want to note that Councilmember Palmisano had authored a zoning code change in 2014 related to 1 to 4 unit buildings. There's been some ideas coming from staff, planning commissioners, that is about looking at, increasing the point, changing the point system that we're using now, which would be applying to 1 to 3 unit buildings. We talked about incorporating some of those changes into this ordinance, but because she had done so much stakeholder engagement and so much conversations about that change back then, we wanted to make sure that that had its own discussion. So she is likely to be bringing forward something that incorporates those recommendations from staff and others in the near future. And that would be looking again at the point system that's required for 1 to 3 unit buildings in our city and essentially strengthening them and requiring a higher level of design. So thank you.
Thank you. Before we take a vote on that, I also just want to thank staff. It was a lot of work to make something so simple and easy to understand, and that's really critical as we're talking to the public about this change. So, Council President's motion is before us. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. And finally, item number 11 is an update on the implementation of Minneapolis 2040, which was approved by Council last week, and we'll begin with a brief staff presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Paul Mogish. I'm the manager of community planning. I'll be joined in a minute by Jason Wittenberg, manager of code development, and we will talk fast. Last week, the City Council voted to place the Minneapolis 2040 comprehensive plan into effect on January 1st. We heard from several council members at the committee of the whole last week about the importance of carrying the planning work through to implementation and to show our work in progress along the way. In fact, the council formalized this expectation in December of last year with the direction to staff to provide regular updates on the implementation and evaluation of the comprehensive plan's goals, policies, and action steps to the Racial Equity Subcommittee, with a particular emphasis on prioritizing race equity commitments in the plan. The first of that update, that first update happened last spring. And at that update, the Long-Range Planning Director, Heather Worthington, provided this handout that you see on your screen, showing some of the interconnected efforts underway currently that are serving as venues for comprehensive plan implementation. The breadth of these initiatives touches the work of most council committees and city departments, carrying forward the interdepartmental coordination that took place during the drafting of Minneapolis 2040. And just as staff made a concerted effort to show our work during the comprehensive planning process, we also understand the importance of tracking the city's progress toward achieving Minneapolis 2040 goals going forward. So when the plan goes into effect in January, there will be a new section of the Minneapolis 2040 website dedicated to displaying an initial set of metrics that will be updated regularly. This information, combined with research that we expect to be conducted by external partners, will help us to evaluate the effectiveness of plan policy commitments and implementation actions, and will inform any plan changes and course corrections along the way that will help achieve the plan goals. So with that brief background, I know that of particular interest to this committee in the last few minutes of this meeting are the next steps for zoning changes that will follow the action that you just took. For that, I'll hand it over to Jason Wittenberg.
Thank you, committee members. As you know, some of the key regulatory changes that are necessary early on in the process are already underway, with some that are largely completed. So Minneapolis 2040 itself, of course, has been acted on by the council with an effective date of January 1st. Just minutes ago, you acted on regulations related to 1 to 3 unit buildings, as well as lot combinations. And then led by Andrea Brennan. We are working across departments to work on a permanent inclusionary zoning ordinance. The public hearing for that will take place November 18th with HPD and Z&P review of both that ordinance and unified housing policy changes in early December. All of those things will come together with an effective date of January 1st. You might recall that this committee reviewed and approved a text amendment work plan, zoning code text amendment work plan a few months ago, back in July. That's guiding our early work on Minneapolis 2040 regulatory implementation. The next major 2040 related amendment that we'll be working on will be to create zoning districts that implement the plan's built form regulations or guidance. So those will govern things like building height, floor area, setbacks, et cetera. We've laid out a very aggressive timeline to draft and map those changes over the course of probably the next 8 to 10 months. The approved work plan has a number of both technical and policy items on it. It is not an exhaustive list currently of the things that are going to be required to implement Minneapolis 2040 over the next several years. So we, of course, will be bringing forward a work plan that has additional items in the not too distant future and periodically. We expect that there will likely be a steering committee that guides this work, and of course, land use and zoning regulations are simply one piece of Minneapolis 2040's implementation. So this work will be across the enterprise, both in terms of land use as well as other city initiatives that will work toward implementation of Minneapolis 2040. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Not seeing any questions. All right, thank you for that. Council President?
I guess maybe I do have a comment that I'd invite response to if you'd like. We've had a lot of discussions about the sort of timing and phasing of things, and I think this one particular project we just heard about alone highlighted a number of different policy directions that if that project had come forward in January under the plan's guidance, we would see a lot of different potential conflicts and confusion. So we know that in some ways we have a sense of urgency to align our zoning code with the plan's guidance and to eliminate those inconsistencies for neighbors, for landowners, for developers, for policymakers. But on the other hand, we have a lot of very ambitious goals related to race equity and climate change, and wanting to make sure that we're not missing an opportunity to, really get things right. Knowing that, things will evolve over time, but, really not wanting to, to leap into zoning changes without making sure that we are really centered on that race equity, climate change, those bigger goals. Can you talk about that and how staff is approaching that balance?
Sure, Chair Schrader, Council President Bender. There are a lot of really important and ambitious goals in Minneapolis 2040, and I think there's a realization that we are not able to implement all of those in a matter of months, that this is a process that's going to take some time. So part of what is guiding our prioritization is that the state does require that we resolve major conflicts between our policies and our regulations. So where we see those conflicts being most overt, we're trying to tackle some of those early on, but certainly with also a lens of equity being at the forefront of those things. And that, again, will require not only the land use piece, but key work from Public Works and other departments as well.
Thanks, and kind of on that note, I'm going to bring forward a staff direction. Colleagues, you have a copy, and I'm sorry, Councilmember Gordon.
Well, I don't want to delay things too much, but I have kind of a specific process question that's come up from neighborhood and community folks, and I want to make sure that I'm clear on this. So as we're moving forward with these map changes and the zoning changes, we're bound to have people who come up and say, oh, that's what the comp plan said we were going to be in this lot, this block face. I'm not sure we think that's the right fit. Or council members might come up and say, oh, I thought it was I-3 and it's I-2. I want to make sure it's I-3. If we wanted to do that, Would that change in that amendment also have to go to the Met Council for approval? So we'd be talking about actually amending our comp plan? Or is that something we'll have some flexibility to do in terms of when we're redrawing the map and changing the zoning from our old zoning to the new zoning?
Councilmember Gordon, good question. Certainly our intent, first of all, is to not sort of relitigate the policies of Minneapolis 2040 through the implementation process. And the plan is much more clear and detailed on a parcel-by-parcel basis than previous comprehensive plans have been. So sometimes that's going to guide us in a very clear direction. And where neighbors feel as though that clear direction should be revisited, then yes, we would have to go back through an amendment process that would involve Metropolitan Council review. Of course, there are cases where there's more gray area. However, if somebody feels as though corridor 4 should really be interior 2, for example, clearly that's something that we'll have to revisit through an amendment process that, again, would involve the Metropolitan Council.
Appreciate that. And I'll just say, not only could it come from council members or neighbors, but staff may come back and say, oh, I'm not that. Staff is generally infallible and perfect, but sometimes we reevaluate something when we're looking at it and we're saying, I think we maybe got that wrong. But any of those significant changes have to be amendments to the comp plan that would go to the Met Council, except for that gray area that we'll, I guess, learn more about.
Right, yes, and those are good points. That it's likely that 2 years from now, we will, within that period of time, we'll identify things where we might want to rethink a few things.
And hopefully we'll organize that well in a package, and we're not going to be going back for many amendments to the Met Council. I'm certainly not advocating that we do that. In fact, I think that's a motivation for us not to make many changes. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I'm going to bring forward a staff direction. So colleagues, you have a copy in front of you. The clerk also has copies. The staff direction is directing the community planning and economic development staff to develop zoning code amendments to codify the policy direction of Minneapolis 2040 through the future land use and build form maps pursuant to sections 473 period 864 and section 473 period 865 of the Metropolitan Land Planning Act. The zoning code amendments shall be completed incrementally over several years and will address and reflect the policy objectives stated in the Minneapolis 2040 plan, including but not limited to racial equity, affordable housing and housing stability, environmentally sustainable building standards, design standards for all scales of development, and land uses that support job creation in production areas. Staff is directed to coordinate the rezoning study with other Minneapolis 2040 plan implementation activities, including related policy initiatives, development business planning and budgeting, and the integration of land use planning with the infrastructure planning to achieve equity, sustainability, transportation, and greenhouse gas emission goals. Staff is directed to establish an implementation steering committee for the zoning and zoning related amendments, comprised of the zoning and planning committee chair, the transportation and public works chair, the zoning and policy development chair, CPED executive director or designees, the public works director or designees, the city coordinator, city clerk or designees, city attorney or designees, and the director of race and equity or designees. I'll see if there are any other questions. Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank you for working on this and the chairs who will be moving this forward. I did want to note, since it came up by Councilor Cow last week, but I think the intention of this group is really specific to the zoning code updates and things that are related to them. And Councilmember Reich and I have staff directions that are kind of adding a little bit more meat to a couple of specifics, but there'll be lots of them. And knowing that, the Race Equity Subcommittee will be involved, that there'll be lots of council members working on other policy things that are related to the comprehensive plan. So I think this is a good approach to some of these really important technical things that are coming up that Mr. Wittenberg talked about. So thank you for doing this. And then, but if you'd like, Mr. Chair, we can take all of those staff directions. I have a staff direction that is also in front of all of us. This is specific to an issue of investing in transportation infrastructure in places that are experiencing growth, especially those that are already dense or in places that are changing a lot, like the place that we just heard about earlier today. And I think we're not planning to bring a staff direction, I don't think, about every single specific topic that this group will be taking on and that staff is in many cases already working on. But because this is multi-departmental and really collaborative, even with external agencies like the county and Metro Transit, I thought it was important to just really be clear that this piece of integrating transportation and land use planning is so important to us as policymakers. It's so important to our constituents. When I hear from folks in Ward 10 who are generally supportive or accepting of new housing along transit, they always ask me, when is the transit coming? When are we going to start to see transit improvements? And these are neighborhoods that are already some of the most dense in the city, that are growing rapidly. A lot of neighbors are adjusting to a lot of change and simply want to see that commitment from the city and our partners to invest in the transportation access that we are talking about planning around. So I appreciate the work that's happened so far from CPED and Public Works. I'll be there to support it along with the chair and others. And I think this is just such a critical piece.
Councilmember Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and likewise, the one that I'm moving forward, as I understand that staff has already been considering these dynamics of how the market reflects some of our goals and ambitions, and sometimes it can be rather indifferent. Specifically, if we have a mixed-use designation, which I think was very wisely developed for the 2040 plan, that's great, but the market doesn't always respect the color coding and might just say it's not going to be mixed use, it'll be one type of use, unless there's other policy guidance, prohibitions that are identified very specifically to balance out market forces and our end intentions. And so mine specifically just says to explore that and come up with in-depth policies that address market forces and our intentions for mixed areas, and appreciate the work to date.
Thank you, and just appreciate the work of my colleagues. This is something, 2040 is a big deal, and we want to make sure that we get it right. And I think the full force of the city is committed to doing that, and I appreciate my colleagues that are really making sure that our goals are going to be seen as this plan gets rolled out. So with that, I'm going to kind of move or take a vote on the staff directions. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and those three staff directions are done. I will also just move to receive and file the update on 2040. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. And seeing no further business before this committee, we are adjourned.